He pulled me back from the brink of death, only to imprison me in his world. I thought I had escaped that terrifying place, but fate pushed me back into his arms. Chapter 28. I didn't want to freak you out, I screamed. I don't know how it sounded because honestly, I could no longer hear. All of my senses were focused on what appeared to be part of a dead body lying only feet away from me. My legs flailed, pushing me as far away from the hand as possible. I've AP registered Samuel helping me along the wall and calling out my name, but I didn't answer him. Then suddenly, he left my side. Achiti laid the phone beside me, and I grabbed it quickly, holding to the light for dear life. I followed Samuel's movements and watched as he forcefully pulled the blankets around the hand, adjusting whatever else was under the material. When he came to sit next to me again, he rested his fingers on my arm. I didn't move. I cowered. My eyes were still trained on the place had seen the gory hand, and they never wanted to leave. Though I could only view the dark material of the blankets now, I knew what was underneath. Nothing could shield that anymore. I suddenly felt a small pressure on my chin, pulling my face to the side. Before I knew what was happening, I was staring into the eyes of Samuel. His fingers gripped my chin, just hard enough to hold my face in place. Samantha, look at me. Samuel's voice came out gently. I reluctantly did as I was told. My eyes stopped darting to the side, but instead focused on the face before me. Familiar dark eyes, stubbledy chin, wide nose. The longer I stared, the more that I surprisingly calmed down. It seemed as if focusing on Samuel's features forced my brain to think of something other than the limb hanging in my memory. Samuel eventually dropped his hand, but I didn't divert my gaze. I took a deep breath, searching his features for an explanation. What was that? I slowly asked, despite knowing exactly what it was I saw. Samuel closed his eyes inside, and I somehow knew he was about to play it off. Before he got the chance to speak, I interrupted. Don't you dare tell me it was nothing. That was nothing. You're not stupid. He opened his eyes and let a small smile come to his face. I guess I should have seen that one coming. Samuel, I snapped, the smile disappearing as quickly as it came. I don't know what to tell you. Samantha, how about you start with why there was a bloody hand under a pile of blankets? I didn't want you to freak out. Great job you did there. Finally breaking my gaze away, I looked down to my lap, suddenly not wanting to face the rest of the truck. We were still bouncing along the dirt road, and things were continuously being thrown around. There was no guarantee the blanket hadn't shifted again. Why are you carting dead bodies around? Samuel stilled, shock lining his face. He thought for a moment before painfully uttering his next words. They're not dead. Samantha. My expression followed his, though fear melded with my shock as well. What? He shook his head, glancing up at the spot I was avoiding. Bray found them. Riley wants some answers. They're human, I practically whispered, panic creeping up my spine. Yes, but you don't need to worry. They won't hurt you. He quickly spoke, misplacing my fears. Bray will take care of them when we get back. I nodded, biting my bottom lip. It was the humans I was worried about. The only thing running through my mind was the fact that if I didn't listen to Rai, the bloodied hand and unconscious body would easily be mine. Who is it? I suddenly asked, recalling the countless faces of Damaria's people. I can't tell you that. I shook my head, pushing away my annoyance. However, Samuel clearly saw through my weak facade. It's not that I don't want to tell you. Riley just doesn't want anyone to know. We're not even telling the pack. My interest peaked. How does that work? What do you mean? I mean, how would they not know? They're everywhere. Samuel laughed, folding his arms in his lap. It does seem like that, doesn't it? Why wouldn't you tell them? I tried again, ignoring how he danced around my previous question. Riley just doesn't want everyone freaking out. There were a lot more people with Damaria than we originally thought. He doesn't want the pack to panic. I agree. I furrowed my eyebrows. That made no sense. Why on earth would they panic? They were just humans. His tone hardened. Humans can do a lot of damage. I bit my lip once more, staying silent for several long minutes. Samuel didn't seem too intent on starting up a conversation, either, because he'd taken back his phone and was typing away on the screen. His movements were foreign and out of place, but I didn't comment on it. The only time it ever interacted with Samuel was when he was following me traversing through the woods, so it was hard to think of him doing anything different. But now that I thought about it, it only made sense. Everyone had phones. Well, everyone but me. You should sleep, Samuel eventually commented, finally laying his phone down. He kept the light on, something I greatly appreciated. It's going to be a few hours. I tilted my head. How far are we? Maybe 3 hours from the edge of town. A bit longer after that. I meant, how far distance-wise? He paused, pursing his lips and thinking. I'm not sure. Maybe close to a little over 100 miles out. Why? I ignored him, a small smile spreading across my face. Even though I was caught running, it'd gotten pretty far. Granted, most of the miles traveled were in a car with Cade, but it walked a fair distance too. It was hard not to be proud of my small accomplishment, even if it didn't mean anything anymore. What are you smirking about? Samuel suddenly asked. I darted my gaze up to him for a small moment. My smirk widened a bit more as I used Samuel's method against him. It's nothing. He laughed. It wasn't for strained, but a full-sounding bark that echoed through my ears. Tooth. Samantha. We fell into a comfortable silence. I had no intent on breaking it and was even debating trying to sleep again. However, the thought of Samuel catching me in a nightmare was enough to keep me awake. Samuel eventually broke the silence, much to my dismay. You know, we should talk. About what? I slowly asked. About what happened. I know you're still upset with me. I wasn't quite ready to have this conversation. Yes, I knew exactly how I felt and where I stood, but I also knew that I could share none of it with Samuel. Not anymore. Not now that Riley had threatened my family. I started fidgeting with my hands, picking at the skin on my fingers. What's there to talk about? It was long, tired, and heavy. Look, I'm sorry for the things I said. It was uncalled for. I was pissed off and not thinking. I was confused for a moment before I remembered our encounter where it finally snapped. It was just after I realized Samuel lied to me, and I was beyond furious. To be honest, the conversation was still raw in my mind. The deception was as fresh as the worm on my side. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Hiding my face from his and trying not to cringe at my next words. I'm sorry. To Samuel shifted his position. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I paused. His voice reminded me of a small child waiting anxiously for a parent's praise. Was it really this easy to fool him? Finally, I laughed once, trying to hide my discomfort. I guess so. What? No angry insult. Samuel chuckled. Don't push me. I mused. From the corner of my eye, I saw him raise his hands in surrender. Done. I don't think I could face that again. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was terrifying. I rolled my eyes. Right. He continued laughing. No, I'm serious. You could be a seriously scary she-wolf. My body tensed. My nerves skyrocketed. His comment replayed in my mind, over and over again. No matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't even. I cowled and relax. It'd been an innocent remark, but it insinuated something far from it. I'm not a wolf. I tried not to seethe, but I wasn't successful. Samuel unmistakably noticed my sudden change. Look, I was just making a joke. He quickly backtracked. I didn't mean anything by it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I responded a little too quickly, folding my arms across my chest. I held myself tightly, forcing back every emotion possible. Once I was sure my rashness wouldn't get the better of me, I slowly repeated myself. Samuel sighed, abruptly changing the subject. It was a smart move. You should try and get some sleep. The doctor wants to see you as soon as we're back. I gently nodded my head, leaning it against the wall next to me. The metal was cold against my cheek, but it was the good kind of cold, the kind that allowed you to focus on the numbness. Once that dominated my mind, fatigue quickly found me. Before I knew it, despite my best efforts, I was falling asleep to the sounds of Samuel's breathing. Chapter 29. Just call me a saint. The drive was long. I didn't sleep, no matter how much I tried. With each bump in the road, each nightmare that started, and each movement from Samuel, I was left more and more awake. So, I spent the time thinking. I thought about everything that happened previously and everything that was bound to follow our arrival back in town. The reality of the situation was pressing, and decisions needed to be made. So I started with the small things and worked my way up. The least of my worries was that I would probably no longer be allowed to work or to go anywhere. For that matter, I would have no more freedom in any sense of the word. Samuel would never leave me. That much. I needed to get used to his presence, which led directly to my next problem. I would probably be spending a lot more time with the wolves. If Samuel still insisted I move in with him, he'd probably be living with the rest of his kind. They would most likely all want to eat me alive. I was supposed to ignore this and push past my anger at Samuel. To my agent extraordinaire,丨Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. At everyone. It'd have to do more than lie and fake emotion because they would see right through me. Riley would see right through me. There was no doubt in my mind Riley would constantly be watching me. That I was sure of. I'd monitor my every move and hold it over my head if I didn't live up to his expectations. Samuel had to be kept happy. If not, I was the only one that would get hurt. At that, my thoughts turned to Riley's threat, his demands. It was in that moment, in the dark of the truck with Samuel distracted beside me, that I finally allowed myself to dwell on the fact that my humanity wouldn't last much longer. If Samuel wanted to turn me, I couldn't refuse. Riley wouldn't let me. If I were to even try, my own life would be the least of my concerns. I saved my biggest concern for last, knowing once I'd dwelled on this thought all others would cease. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. All other thoughts led me here. To my agent extraordinaire, Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My family, my small, broken family. I couldn't help but think of the possibility of arriving back home only to find they were gone. Dead. That thought broke me more than anything else could. They were all I had. I was hopeful that Riley hadn't harmed them, as I hadn't provoked him enough to do so. But they'd been left alone with James, and that was just as dangerous. These thoughts were enough to occupy my mind for days. So it was surprising when enough time had passed and the truck was suddenly being opened. When the light flooded our surroundings, I was given time to adjust, think, or move. Samuel scooped me up and brought me directly to the hospital. I was in the same hospital where we resided. That much I knew. It was where all the humans were treated. Where I was, what floor, or even what room, was left a mystery. When Samuel brought me through the sliding doors, a whirlwind of people hit me. I vaguely recognized a few of their faces from when I visited Will, but none of them would look directly at me. They followed orders barked at them by Samuel, hurriedly preparing what was needed to make me whole again. They'd brought me to this room, placed me on the bed, and cleaned me up. It was absolute hell. They'd dressed and sewn up my gunshot wound, force needled into my skin, pushed medicines down my throat, and mumbled about infection and treatments. I was a rag doll in their hands, a broken dish they were intent upon forcing back together. It seemed like lifetimes before they left. When they did, it was only after they were temporarily satisfied with the endless supply of fluids and pain medication dripping into my body. I was now lying back on the bed in a white gown with matching knitted blankets pulled up to my shoulders. I was supposed to be sleeping, but I was only fading in and out. For some reason, my body wouldn't let me fully relax. The reason couldn't be that Samuel was continuously staring at me from across the room. "Will you stop?" I finally called out, shifting the blanket around me. My sleep deprivation left me utterly exhausted and therefore short-tempered. I was normally able to ignore his intrusive stares, but today they were dominating my consciousness. Enthusiasm. After the rush of doctors started to recede, I thought Samuel would leave to be examined. But the hospital workers didn't so much as glance at him. He seemed to be in perfect health. It was as if the past week never happened. "Stop what?" I crossed my arms, ignoring the wires that tangled around me. "You know what?" I grumbled. "You're supposed to be sleeping. You know." My eyes rolled dramatically. "I know. Do you need something to help you?" He started to stand, motioning to someone through the open door. He quickly caught an Ursa's eye and she began a slow trudge to my room. "No," I quickly cried. He looked back at me curiously but didn't stop the nurse. I frantically continued. "No, I don't need anything. I'll fall asleep in no time. No time at all. No drugs needed," I rambled, waving my hand. To prove my point, I leaned my head back once more and pretended to get comfortable. Samuel stayed in place, continuing to watch me before he waved off the woman who came to the door. When she was gone, he slowly wandered to my bed. My body involuntarily tensed at his presence, but I tried not to let it show. So far, it put on a pretty good show of trust, and I was going to stop now. "You're acting a little crazy," he told me. "Meta, are you sure you don't want anything? I would stay here the whole time you were asleep." That's what I was afraid of. Being completely alone with Samuel while I was in a drug-induced sleep. I forced my body to relax and pushed out a yawn. "It'll be fine if you just stop staring." Raising his hands in surrender. "Fine. Anything for you." Samuel made his way back across the room to sit in the armchair he'd been occupying all afternoon. It was a light-colored woodwood with green cushions and seemed extremely out of place compared to everything else. The rest of the room was plain and colorless. My bed, the table designed to hover over me, even the equipment. A large window was to my right, but the curtains had been shut to hide the outside view. He settled himself in the uncomfortable chair and pulled out his phone. When I was sure he wouldn't move, I turned away from him and closed my eyes for what seemed like the 100th time. I was immediately met with visions of guns and bloodied family members. I was almost used to these pictures running through my mind by now, but they still stung, preventing me from even thinking about sleep. After only a few short minutes, I opened my eyes and trained them on the heart monitor sitting next to me. It beeped monotonously but kept track of the time passed. I let the rhythm to lull me into a numb state, where I was allowed to lay on the bed and pretend to be anywhere but here. Eventually, though I'm not sure how, I fell asleep. It was, once again, fitful and nightmarish. When I woke up, the room was dark and the door was shut. A bright light shone underneath the crack, illuminating the few pieces of furniture in the room with me. My gaze glanced over Samuel, who was still sitting in his chair, but now with his head slumped on his shoulder. I shook away the images remaining in my mind and pulled the blanket and countless cords off of my body. My feet swung around and hit the floor, and when I was ready, I pulled myself up to stand. I swayed only slightly, but for the most part, held a firm position. When I was sure I wouldn't fall, I quietly padded away from my bed and towards the bathroom door next to Samuel. The minute I got a foot away from my bed, though, something caught on my arm and fell to the ground. It crashed and bounced, sending an abrupt noise to the still and quiet room. Not another moment passed before Samuel was on his feet, searching the room wildly. I paused, ignoring Samuel, and half turned to glare at the tangled cord that knocked my cup of water to the floor. When I was sufficiently satisfied that nothing else would fall if I moved, I started towards the bathroom once more. I was stopped, however, by Samuel's broad frame stalking towards me. "What are you doing?" he called out. His voice held to many emotions: worry, concern, to my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, and a touch of hurt. I was confused until I realized the scene HED woken up to. It was the middle of the night and I was sneaking in the direction of the front door. The bathroom was right next to it. But of course, that wouldn't be Samuel's initial thought. I was just trying to go to the bathroom. I quickly muttered. He was beside me now, untangling a cord I hadn't noticed that was attached to my wrist. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." He looked at me warily, watching my lost expression. Finally, he shook his head and sighed. "Sure." I couldn't hold back my scoff. "If you're that worried about me running, then maybe you just tie me up. Works for everyone else. Stop being so dramatic." He rolled his eyes and tried to hold back a frown. His hand was still on my wrist, though the wire was long gone. Eyes glancing over my expression as I shifted under his stare. I was still fuming at his comment and I was certainly not holding back my glare. Eventually, "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." He met my eyes and softened. "Come on, I'll help you to the bathroom." I let him help me to the door, where he waited patiently for me to finish my business. I gave myself enough time to compose my features and push back my anger. When I was through and ready to face Samuel, he carefully led me back to the bed and pulled the blankets around my shoulders. I leaned my head against the flat pillow and pressed a button that raised the back of the bed and allowed me to sit up. Samuel watched me warily, holding out his arms as if I was going to fall. "It's going to be hard to sleep sitting up, don't you think?" he asked after a while. I adjusted my pillow and closed my eyes, wishing I could ignore him. "I'm not tired. I got enough sleep." "I think we both know true." I raised one eyebrow while opening my eyes to a slit. When I saw his hardened expression, I closed them again and remained silent. I was finding that it was easier to say nothing than to risk the wrong words escaping my mouth. Samuel slowly lowered himself to sit at the foot of my bed. His hand rested on my cuff and I fought the urge to pull it away. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," I quickly responded. "Do you need any more pain medicine?" "No, you'll tell me if you do." "No, sure." We fell into silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was filled with unease. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." It was just there. Neither of us knew what to say, and I believed it was because neither of us knew what to do. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." No matter how I tried, Samuel knew I was still upset with him. He'd known me long enough to realize I didn't let things go so easily. Why he was confronting me about it was something I was going to bring up. I listened to the soft hum of voices outside my room, trying to discern what they were saying. It passed a bit of time and allowed me to focus on something other than Samuel's fingers running along my lower leg. "How long will I be here?" I suddenly broke the silence. Opening my eyes, they'd adjusted to the dark room now, and I was able to make out Samuel's features clearly. His main feature was exhaustion, and I could tell he needed several more hours of sleep before the bags under his eyes would disappear. He thought for a moment. "I'm honestly not sure. They want to watch you and make sure everything is all right. There's a big chance your wound is infected." "I'm fine." But he quickly cut me off. "Samantha," he deadpanned. "You were shot." I huffed out a short breath. "So were you. More than once, I believe." "Yeah, well, I heal quickly," he muttered. It was hard to tell he wasn't in the mood to argue. I quickly changed the subject, asking my next question before thinking it through. Can I see you while I'm here? I paused after I asked, watching him carefully. His eyebrows raised and then furrowed, and I instantly regretted my outburst. This was a question I wanted an answer to. He was quiet for a moment longer before slowly saying, I don't see why not. Had I heard him right? Not here was no, absolutely no way. HUD never allow me to see my family after I ran. I was supposed to be rejected, clicked down, and banned from speaking for the rest of the night. Samuel noticed my astonishment. His lip twitched, hinting at a small smile. Did you really think I wouldn't let you see him? I'm not that big of a dick. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My mind barely registering my words. His expression dark and I quickly recovered, catching up with the conversation. Sorry, not about that last part. You're really okay with me seeing him? His face fell back to normal and he shrugged. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I mean, you can't go alone, but you can still see him. A large smile slowly spread across my face. I never expected there'd be allowed contact with my family. Never thought that Samuel would allow me any relationship outside of his. Thank you, I breathed. When can I see him? He looked at the curtains. I guess when morning finally decides to show up. My smile spread further. Thank you. Really? I repeated. This time a smile did appear on his face. I watched it light up his features like it had so many times before. He looked years younger with this expression, and it suited him greatly. Not that I would ever tell him that. Just call me a saint, he responded, waving his hands aimlessly. I tried to hold back a smile. Yeah, right. He looked at me with pure innocence, mock offense lining his amused expression. You don't think him a saint? You're a lot of things, Samuel, but I don't think a saint is one of them. I left. It was a loud noise, abrupt and foreign. I couldn't remember the last time that sound came from my lips. Samuel was slightly shocked as well, but he recovered quickly. You hurt me, Samantha. I rolled my eyes, my small fit of laughter dying off. When I looked up again, Samuel had his dark eyes trained on mine. They held something unreadable, some untold thought or emotion. I was suddenly reminded of the past week, the pain and betrayal from every corner, and it was as if the world came crashing down around me, reminding me that I had nothing to laugh for. I cleared my throat, quickly glancing away, trying to remain casual. You should get some sleep. You look worse than me. I shook my head, attempting to clear my thoughts. He shrugged and momentarily took his hand off my leg, stretching his arms high above his head. No, I'm great. Besides, if you're in a good mood, we could talk about some things. What things? I held back a groan. I hated talking about things. This might have worked moments ago, but now every time I looked at Samuel I could only think of the reasons I ran from him. Mirroring those thoughts were Riley's threats, constantly reminding me that if Samuel wasn't happy, my family would be hurt. I tried to hold back a sigh. This was impossible. Samuel let out a small laugh. Well, I talked to Riley about everything. I told him about you, your situation, everything. My heart skipped a beat and I almost missed his next words. He agrees that things are different because at least one of the reasons you ran was your father. Stepfather. I automatically mumbled. He shot me a look, to which I mumbled a quick. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel nodded. His hand moved to rest on my foot, where he rubbed small circles as he finished his explanation. I just decided to let you off pretty easy. I mean, considering you are a human and all. And you broke one of the biggest laws. His voice trailed off for a moment while he thought of his next words. I tried desperately to hold my tongue and push back my glares. Archie's giving you a small sentence. Simple house arrest for a few weeks. Maybe less. House arrest. What did that even mean? Samuel noticed my confusion. It basically means you'll just be confined to a certain place, under surveillance, for a certain amount of time. Just one place. He nodded and I furrowed my eyebrows. So essentially, you're throwing me into a jail to rot away the rest of my days. Samuel's body stiffened slightly and he took a deep breath. When he spoke though, his voice was surprised and gentle. Of course not. It's called house arrest for a reason. So you're confining me to my house forever. No, he started, shifting his weight so he was sitting more fully on the bed. He paused the circular movements of his hand and gripped my foot lightly. My house. Chapter 30. I'm not so dense the bastard. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Conniving. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Riley knew Samuel would come to him. He knew Samuel would ask what to do with me. And what had he suggested? That I be locked inside his house for an immeasurable amount of time as punishment for something they deemed wrong. He was a genius, even in my current state. I couldn't deny it. I would be a fool not to realize what this meant. If I was locked away with Samuel as my only contact, not only would I be forced to be with him, but ATD be given that much more access to my life, my humanity, the very thing I was trying desperately to hold on to. There would be no running, no stopping him. I would be rendered helpless to his will. Samuel watched carefully as countless thoughts and emotions crossed my features. I tried to keep my face numb and untelling, but it wasn't working. I knew it wasn't. My brain was sluggish, my body was tired, and I was coming to the ends of my ropes. Samuel read me like an open book. I knew he saw the pain and fear etched permanently in my eyes and there was absolutely nothing at it. No matter how hard I fought against it, how much willpower I had, or how many times I convinced myself it'd be all right, my resolve eventually had to end somewhere. Suddenly, I was panicking. I didn't know why. It expected this punishment or at least something like it. I knew that the minute I stepped back into this town, Riley would cause me a world of hurt. He would make sure I was exactly what he and Samuel wanted. There was no way around it. So why was it that when my fate was finally revealed, I had wave after wave of panic, dread, and anxiety crash upon me? Tense minutes passed. I tried calming myself. I truly did. However, with each one gone, another piece of my mind followed. Samuel was silent. He didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And the situation was quickly turning into an impending storm. Each minute, each second, signified one more wave pushing me further under a frenzied ocean. Samuel was at the surface, waiting, while unbeknownst to him, I fought to breathe. My breaths were short and shaking in time with my hands. I planted them firmly in my lap, trying desperately to shield the tremors from Samuel's watchful eye. My heart was racing. The monitor beside me registered the accelerated pace. The beeping noise quickened until it sounded like one solid high-pitched drone. I didn't acknowledge it and prayed Samuel would do the same. He couldn't know what his words were doing to me. Riley would find out and we'd all be dead. Samuel opened his mouth, worry lines etching deeper into his skin. The smile he held before was nowhere to be seen, replaced instead with a man that had too many troubles. He looked at me with a pained expression as his body went stiff, watching intently as I slowly unraveled. When the heart monitor didn't calm down, he nodded to himself and smiled sadly at me. His gaze darted to the door, leading to the myriad of hospital staff. Before I could say anything, he called for them. Another wave hit me. This time, it forced every last bit of air out of my lungs. I fought frantically to breathe in again, but it wasn't working. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't get air. There was nothing there. My hands snaked to my chest and throat where they clutched and pulled at my skin, fighting to find a new way to breathe. What happened? A woman suddenly spoke. I shot my gaze up to see a petite woman with short blonde hair. She was standing in the middle of the group of workers that had just flooded the room. They each had their gazes drilled into me, silently assessing my declining state. I flinched away from them, but they did not rush me like before. For whatever reason, they stood rooted in place. I suspected it had something to do with the werewolf sitting at the foot of my bed, just having another panic attack. Samuel started, moving to the side as he spoke. Only when he moved was I immediately engulfed in what seemed to be an endless number of people. A light was shown into my eyes the same moment my legs and arms were gripped by numerous hands. I quickly realized I was thrashing wildly, my arms and legs striking at whatever they could make contact with. I told my limbs to stop. I told myself to calm down. I told my lungs to breathe. But my head was spinning. Nothing was making sense. And I still couldn't get any air. Eventually, things started to slow down. The nurses and doctors blurred. A sensation was slowly overtaking my senses, dragging me far away from the hospital bed. The blonde woman's face was suddenly over mine, and she was speaking softly, though I couldn't make out the words. Her voice sang a soft lullaby. The sound overcame and filled my thoughts. In the next moment, I could only see darkness. My eyes fluttered open suddenly. There was no gradual ease back into reality. Rather, it hit me like a freight train. I was still in the hospital, still in the same room. Nothing had changed from when they put me under. Not even Samuel sitting in his chair. He was sleeping, like the last time I awoke, and it almost felt as if nothing had happened. I could almost pretend Samuel and I never had a conversation. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The memories moved slow as molasses, but they were there. They just weren't making sense. Then again, the only thing I could really focus on was my throat. It was burning, begging for liquid. I noticed the water on the table beside me and reached out to it instantly. When my hand lifted up, though, it met resistance. My eyes groggily traveled down my arm to stare at my wrist. It was loosely tied to the side of my bed with a soft fabric. When I attempted lifting my other arm, I found the same thing. I groaned loudly and gradually lifted myself up to a sitting position, staring confused still at the two pieces of material binding me to the bed. Abruptly, I heard movement from across the room. By the time I lifted my head up, Samuel was beside me, eyeing me cautiously. I stared blankly back at him, my eyelids heavy and refusing to cooperate. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words would come out, though this would normally bother me. I couldn't find it in me to care. The only thing I wanted was water. Suddenly, I felt his hand on my arm. It was strange, almost comforting, feeling his flesh so delicately resting upon my own. His hand was light and gentle, only resting there to give me reassurance. My eyebrows furrowed at the sensation and I tried to sort through the reasons why I hated Samuel. "Samantha," he softly cooed. The hand lingering on my arm was brought up to my cheek. Unconsciously, I leaned into it. "Samantha, how do you feel?" Though I didn't move my head from his hand, my eyes glanced to the side where I'd seen the water. Samuel understood immediately and brought the cup to my lips, tilting it ever so slightly. The cool liquid fell into my mouth, reviving me slightly. He placed the cup back on the table and sat next to me while pressing a button on my bed. After a few moments and creaking noises, I felt the support of my mattress behind me, allowing me to lean back. I quickly did so, adjusting my weight so I was comfortable. When I was settled, Samuel rested his hand on my thigh. Blankets and my hospital gown separated his flesh from mine, and I was suddenly wishing he'd hold my cheek once more. The thought was unsettling and I quickly pushed it aside as exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he softly asked. His frame was relaxed, along with his features. Dark eyes searched my own. My thoughts were barely starting to become coherent. It took what felt like hours to comprehend his question, then another day to finally speak. When I did eventually respond, my tone was laced with confusion. My wrists. I trailed off. My head rested on my shoulder and I stared down my arm to the soft material binding my limbs. Samuel smiled sadly. We didn't know how you'd be when you woke up. Didn't want you hurting yourself. As he spoke, he reached forward and began untying the fabric. They were only loosely tied in the first place, so it wasn't hard for him to do. When the material was gone, I lifted my wrists to my face, examining them. Samuel chuckled lightly. They must have really knocked you out. You're still pretty out of it, huh? I narrowed my eyes, bringing one hand to hold the side of my head. What happened? My voice came out surprisingly smooth, but notably quiet. Nothing. I sighed heavily, and when his words registered, I used all my strength to glare at him. This only caused him to smile. Just testing you. You had a pretty nasty panic attack. I had them sedate you. I nodded slowly. The molasses of my thoughts were starting to make sense. After a few silent moments, I quietly asked for more water. Samuel quickly gave me the cup again, but this time let me hold it myself. I greedily drank the entire thing, emptying the small plastic cup in seconds. Do you want more? He asked when I handed the cup back. I shook my head and offered a quiet no. He nodded, searching my features. Can you tell me how you're feeling? I took a quick mental inventory. The longer I was awake, the more my consciousness came back to me. I was no longer confused as though to process things, I was just tired. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Carthar thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I ultimately sighed. You should get some more rest. Samuel took my hand lightly in his, keeping it placed in my lap. I didn't fight his grasp but decided to ignore it. How long was I asleep? I disregarded his request. He thought for a moment, frowning slightly. A long time. You slept the entire day yesterday and most of the night. It's about to be morning. That long? I breathed, dumbfounded. That long? You woke up a few times, but you were never up for long. I shook my head in disbelief. I didn't think I'd ever slept that long in my life. It makes sense, Samuel continued, lazily glancing around the room. With all the medicine you're on and what happened, your body needs to recover. Maybe a sedative forced it to do just that. It sure didn't feel like my body had recovered. I guess. I mumbled. Did you sleep or did you stay here the whole time? I slept here, he stated simply, returning his gaze to mine. I wanted to be here if you woke up or something happened. I bit my lip and nodded, bobbing my head to my chest. My hair fell across my features, hiding them like they'd done so many times before. So Samuel slowly started with a question in his voice. You ought to tell me what that was all about. What do you mean? My voice was low. My face was hidden. I mean, something set you off. You were just fine and then you weren't. Oh, I managed half a whisper. I knew exactly what he was talking about, and in my half-awake state, I couldn't find it in me to argue with him. Will you tell me about it? His question caught me off guard. It wasn't a demand or even a request. It was a plea to reveal my innermost thoughts we both knew were deep-rooted fears. Tired, Samuel, I eventually answered. Not only did I not have it in me to argue with him, I also didn't have the strength to open this tightly shut box or pretend to be something I wasn't fine. He slowly nodded. I know. I just want to know what you're thinking. I'm not so dense that I couldn't figure out what set you off. It was silent while he waited for me to gather my thoughts. I brought my head from my chest to lean against the mattress, where I stared at the wall beside Samuel's shoulders. It's just a lot. I tried to explain without revealing too much. My family, too. They're taken care of. I shook my head. You don't understand. I do. He quickly cut me off, squeezing my hand. Have you taken care of it? I knew you'd be upset and asking about your mother. I sent someone over there to check on her. He had my immediate attention. I brushed my hair aside, and my wide eyes landed on his. They were filled with tenderness and understanding. "She's fine." One corner of his lips tilted up. "Her husband is gone." I paused. "Gone?" He nodded. "No one knows what happened. Your mother said he disappeared a few hours before we got back." I let that information slowly sink in. James was gone. Supposedly. It didn't make sense. Why, eventually asked. Samuel was momentarily confused. Why, what? Why would he just run off like that? I shook my head, furrowing my eyebrows. He had no reason to run before, no matter how much we all wished he would disappear. The only thing that changed was Samuel. And as far as I knew, James had no idea about him. Samuel suddenly lowered his gaze. I might have asked someone to retrieve him for me. He must have caught wind. I blinked a few times, his voice swimming in my ear. "You did what?" I asked in disbelief. "I asked someone." I held up my hand that he was holding, cutting him off. "I heard what you said. Why did you do that?" Trying to maintain his casual appearance. However, his gaze stayed averted. "I knew it was important to you. I'd had a lot of time to think, especially on the drive back." I was silent. If I wasn't being careful, my jaw would have been on the floor. His words were registering in my mind, but I was believing them. I also was believing the fact that James had disappeared. I'd lived most of my life under his horrific reign, and to have him suddenly out of the picture wasn't something I ever thought could happen. "So, H.S. gone?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Samuel lifted his eyes to meet mine. Before I knew it, a small smile was forming on my face. I suddenly felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders and buried deep in the ground. James was gone. He was gone. Even if it was temporary. Even if it was under questioning circumstances. He was gone, and that was a day I never thought I'd live to see. "Can you please tell me what you're thinking?" Samuel eventually broke my train of thoughts. His voice held a touch of concern and apprehension. It was only then I realized my face was morphed into an unreadable and half-mad expression. My eyes were wide. My jaw was open, and I was staring blankly at the space in between Samuel and me. I tried and failed miserably to form words, but that didn't stop a wide smile from spreading to my ears. I mean you." Samuel let a small smile tug at his lips. "It'd be great if you could teach me that language. I don't understand gibberish." I shook my head fervently. "Sorry, I trailed off. I don't even know what to say." "Well, I guess there isn't much. I just wanted you not to worry." "Thank you," I whispered. Words couldn't portray how much this single act meant to me. I didn't care so much about myself, but knowing that my mother would no longer have to live with James was enough to send me over the moon. For a moment, everything else was forgotten and I allowed myself to dwell on the fact that something had finally gone right. Samuel finally smiled my favorite smile. "Anytime." Chapter 31. I don't need a wheelchair. I quickly reciprocated Samuel's smile. I couldn't help it. In that moment, a weight I'd been carrying for years was finally taken away. It was liberating. It was freeing. It made it seem as if everything would eventually be okay. "They really mean a lot to you, don't they?" Samuel suddenly questioned. I turned again to look at him. He'd been staring at the wall for the past few minutes, relishing in my small reprieve from reality. "They're all I have. They're everything," I answered simply. "I understand." He gave me a small grin, though it was laced with an emotion other than joy. I tried to catch it, but as soon as it came, it was gone. I furrowed my eyebrows, speaking before I knew what I was saying. "What about you? What about me?" He looked at me with curiosity and amusement. I bit my lip. "Well, I mean, do you have a family?" Samuel was surprised at my sudden forwardness, and to be frank, so was I. The question and my curiosity slipped out before I could stop them. My initial instinct was to retract my question and apologize, but I resisted the urge, letting the question linger heavy in the air. Emotions ran across Samuel's face, disappearing the minute they surfaced. He was quiet for a few moments, deep in thought and contemplating something weighing heavy on his mind. He stole a glance my way every few seconds, as if reassuring himself I was still there. When he finally did answer, his face was devoid of any emotion. "The pack is my family." "Oh," I breathed. "Why the sudden interest?" He gave me a sideways glance. I let out a long sigh. "I don't know. I was just curious." He laughed once. "The pack is all I have," he told me, though his voice was slightly strained. "Riley's always been there for me, and I hope I can always be there for him and the pack." At Riley's name, thoughts, memories, and threats flashed through my mind. My mood was instantly dampened. I didn't let that reach my face but gave Samuel a small smile. "That's nice. I'm glad you have him." Samuel raised one eyebrow at me. I broke his gaze and stared once more at the wall. Just as he was about to say something else, there was a small and timid knock on the door. We both whipped our gazes to it, Samuel tensing slightly. After the third knock sounded, the light wooden door began to slowly open. A woman peeked her head through, glancing at Samuel as she did. He nodded once, and it was enough for her to fully enter the room. When she was fully in view, I was able to recognize her as the woman from before who helped in sedating me. It was her voice that ultimately lulled me into what seemed to be a never-ending sleep. She spoke softly as she walked slowly forward. "How are you feeling today?" Her gaze darted between Samuel and me. "Tired," I trailed off, suspicious of her intentions. Under no circumstances would I be sedated again. "That's to be expected." She smiled sweetly, tucking away a piece of blonde hair into her ponytail. It was then I realized the bags and her monotone face of exhaustion she seemed to brand. She was older than me, probably middle-aged, with a petite frame that was heavily weighed down. The woman continued her way across the room and came to stand on the opposite side of the bed of Samuel. She looked over the monitors, writing a few things down here and there. No one in the room breathed, and the sound of silence was deafening. "How is your pain?" she suddenly questioned, not looking up from what she was writing. I paused, realizing it was practically non-existent. "Great. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." She smiled again, nodding to herself. "We'd like to take a look at your stitches and change your dressings before we move forward with anything else. You're not going to sedate me again, are you?" The woman laughed lightly, and I saw a small smile creep across Samuel's face. "No," she clarified. "We're not." I nodded and smiled back at the woman, relief flooding me. Though I wasn't intent on being sedated, I doubted I could have fought them off. "I'm going to grab some supplies and I will be right back." The woman nodded to us before exiting the room. Samuel stood up from the bed, stretching his arms high above him. He sighed heavily as he moved away from me, retreating to the arm-chair in the corner of the room. "You don't have to stay. You know," I told him, watching the door for the nurses to come back in. "I'm not leaving." The next hour was a blur. The woman brought in other nurses to assist her, and they all worked quietly and quickly, as they peeled back bandages and rubbed cream around my wound. The pain started creeping in once more. I promptly ignored it, knowing additional pain medicine would only add state of exhaustion. So, I gritted my teeth and kept it. As they worked, they explained to me what they were doing and how my healing was progressing, but I didn't really pay attention. Most of their words were foreign. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." All I could gather was that it would take longer than preferable before I was fully functioning again. Though that knowledge was frustrating, it didn't surprise me. Traversing through the woods with two species out to kill you wasn't exactly a walk in the park. I realized that the longer I stayed in the hospital, the longer I could postpone being locked away. Eventually, the nurses left. After they were gone, my wounds were cleaned, and various foods were forced down my throat. I was finally left on my own. "Samuel, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Stayed with me. but it was hard to pay him any attention. I leaned back on my bed once more, closing my eyes and drifting in and out of consciousness. Now that I was moving, my pain was once again non-existent, and I was left with a comfortable numbness. A calming silence filled each and every crack in the room, only adding to my relief. Samuel didn't attempt to speak to me, but allowed me solace in my small reprieve. The remainder of the day proceeded like that. Easy silence with countless naps. The blonde woman would come in every few hours to check on me, but that was the only anomaly in an uneventful day. When the clock read well into the evening, I voiced a thought that had been lingering in my mind. "Can I see Will?" I questioned Samuel, lifting myself to face him. He was currently sitting in his chair, though now it was pulled obnoxiously close to my bed. Between that and the medical equipment, there was much room. Samuel didn't seem to mind though, and he wasn't planning on moving his chair back anytime soon. And Samuel opened one of his eyes. His arms were folded across his chest and he was leaning back, his head falling against the back of the chair. To anyone else, it would have looked like he was sleeping. I, however, knew he never slept unless I did. I asked if I could see Will. I repeated in an even tone. My hands fidgeted with the blanket resting on my waist. I knew that Hed agreed to let me see my brother previously, but that was before I had a slight mental breakdown and had to be sedated. Samuel shifted his weight, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I don't have anything against that." He then paused, mulling over his thoughts. My heart sank, recognizing the uncertain expression he now wore. "But I want to check with the doctors." I let out a heavy breath and tried to resist rolling my eyes. "I just want to go sit with him. I'm not running across town or anything. I know. I just don't want to take any chances." He gave me a pointed look. "You were shot, Samantha, so you keep reminding me." I grumbled. Samuel laughed and rose from his chair, pushing it back. He then stepped towards the door, leaving it half open as he called to the nearest nurse on duty. He lingered just outside of my earshot, speaking with whoever it was in a low tone. I tried desperately to hear what they were saying, but he made sure that was impossible. Soon enough, he eventually came back through the door and walked over to me. I was surprised, however, to see someone trailing closely behind him. When I saw what they carted, it was impossible to hold back his cough. "A wheelchair. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Samuel shrugged, turning around and dismissing the nurse while grabbing the black chair. He placed it directly next to my bed so that I could easily maneuver onto it if needed. When it was locked in place, his hand reached out towards me, gesturing for me to take my place in the horrifying chair. I vehemently shook my head. "I don't need a wheelchair. I figured you'd say that." Samuel looked as if he wanted to be annoyed, but a smile tugged at his lips. "The nurses said that you shouldn't be moving around a lot. It could tear your stitches. Plus, you have a lot of medicine running through you. I'm not exactly sure I trust you to walk on your own." "I'm fine," I insisted, narrowing my eyes. "And I'm not sitting in that thing." "What? You don't trust me?" Samuel pouted. I rolled my eyes at his childish gesture. "Pouting does not look good on you. Wolf boy." He barked a laugh. "In wolf boy. Again. We're back to that. We never left." I grumbled, folding my arms across my chest. Samuel continued laughing, shaking his head. "Look." He paused, moving closer to me and placing a large hand on my folded arms. "I'm ready to take you to see your brother, but my one condition is the chair. It's not that bad. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I looked at it warily, treating it more as a snake than a simple piece of furniture. Having Samuel wheel me around the hospital was the last thing I desired. But on the other hand, I desperately wanted to see Will. I hadn't heard anything about him since I left, and I wasn't sure what state he was in. It'd really be fine to walk. I tried one last time, pushing my chances and playing on Samuel's sympathies. "And it'd really be fine to let you stay in bed all day." I glared at him, where I knew he was going to budge. I let out a frustrated breath and the expression melted away. Moving quickly to the side to allow me full access to the chair, I braced my muscles, swinging my legs over the edge of my bed. Though I tried to do so gracefully and without pain, it didn't go according to plan. I got tangled in blankets and twisted my hips a bit too much, causing a sharp burning to shoot up my side. My breathing hitched in my throat as I held back a gasp, waiting for it to subside. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel was next to me in an instant, holding my hand tightly. "I'm fine," I quickly told him, seeing the look of concern cross his features. "I just moved a bit too quickly." Samuel nodded silently and started untangling the blankets from around my legs, causing me to shiver from the sudden exposure. Not a moment later was he helping me off the bed to sit in the uncomfortable chair. Gracefully and with minimal effort, when I was situated, he placed an extra blanket in my lap. I quickly tucked it around my legs while Samuel grabbed whatever machine I was connected to and pulled it beside the chair. When everything was settled, he unlocked the wheels and began carting me out of the room and across the hospital floors. It was humiliating. I avoided the glances from the hospital workers, though I knew they didn't linger on me for long. From this alone, I knew most of the workers had to be human. They skirted far around the edges of Samuel and me, some even turning the opposite direction when they saw us coming their way. Samuel didn't seem to notice this, nor did he seem to mind. Not soon enough were we finally in a hallway I recognized. I knew the exact room Will was resting in. Somehow Samuel knew this too, as he brought me right outside the correct door. When he reached forward to turn the handle, my heart started racing with anxiety. For all I knew, Will could be on the brink of death and there would be nothing I could do about it. In my current state, there was no way I could continue to provide for his treatment. When the door opened and Samuel wheeled me inside, I took in a sharp breath. The scene before me was enough to send my mind into a frenzy. Will was still laying in a hospital bed in the center of the room. However, that was the only similarity to the room they'd been in so many times before today. This room used to hold the rejected equipment, the overused bed, and monitors that seemed as if they were ready to fall apart. Those were the only things we could afford and the only things James would allow. Now Will was laying in a bed that seemed twice the size of any normal hospital bed. Brand new equipment lined the wall behind him and fresh, up-to-date techs ways littered the opposite. For a fleeting moment, I thought we were in the wrong place. Samuel had paused as soon as we stepped foot in the room, allowing time for me to adjust. I took countless deep breaths, my hand finding its way to my heart while my eyes scanned everything over again and again. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "What happened?" I let out a whisper. Samuel didn't explain but pushed me forward until I was sitting next to Will. I talked with his doctor. He spoke slowly, dancing around my earlier question. She said his surgery went well and he is slowly improving. For the first time, I allowed my eyes to wholly rest on my brother. Compared to the last time I saw him, he looked almost like a different person. His legs were no longer bandaged and elevated, but resting underneath mounds of knitted blankets. The bruises were long gone, leaving his normally rough and dry skin spotless. Though wires were still attached to multiple parts of his body, they were much less than last time. When I looked at him, I could almost imagine he was only sleeping and would wake with a brush of my hand. Tears welled in my eyes, though they weren't tears of sadness. I never thought my brother would recover from what James did to him. But here I was, staring at the evidence of just that. Though he was still asleep and there were parts of his body that still needed healing. It was a far cry from being on the verge of death. It seemed almost a miracle that HED improved this much in the short amount of time since I last saw him. I asked, shaking my head. Samuel moved from behind me to stand at my side. He looked at Will with interest. The doctors have been working hard on him. Apparently, I trailed off, my eyes scanning the new equipment behind Will. Where did all of this come from? Where did all of what come from? I gestured to the walls. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Oh, I can't afford any of it. Samuel shrugged, avoiding my gaze. His peculiar behavior was starting to make sense, and I stared at him in disbelief. It was you, I questioned, but it was more of a statement. When Samuel shrugged again, I grabbed his arm and attention. My eyes bore into his own, demanding an answer. I might have called the hospital. He ultimately sighed. My hand released his arm and absently came back to rest in my lap. I furrowed my brows, searching my mind for a reason as to why Samuel was suddenly acting this way. Up to this point, nothing I wanted about mattered. Now, suddenly, Samuel was straining his neck to take care of those I loved. I was beyond grateful knowing these things were no longer a constant concern. But his actions were perplexing. The minute I thought I had Samuel pinned down, he did something to defy my expectations. Why are you doing this? I asked him softly. Samuel turned my chair to face him as he crouched down to my level. We were staring at each other, face to face. When he spoke, because I want you to be happy, I refused to look at him, knowing if I did I would fall into what I always thought was false sympathy. Confusion swam thick in my mind, and I needed all of my senses in order to try and understand it. That didn't seem to matter before. I eventually told him, resting his hands on mine in my lap. It's always mattered. Samuel must have noticed something lingering on my face because he softly continued. I know I'd messed up. Samantha, trust me. I know. He ran a hand through his dark hair. I'm just trying to fix this. His words swam slowly through my mind, tumbling over one another until I cowed and analyzed them any longer. From the tone of his voice and the desperation on his face, I knew he was telling the truth. However, that terrified me. Can I have a minute? I looked at Samuel briefly before flicking my gaze to remain on Will. I needed time to process what Samuel was telling me, and I couldn't do that with him kneeling in front of me. He hesitated, searching my features. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. His tone was defeated, and I didn't have to look at him to see the strain etched into his features. I didn't watch him walk out of the room, but I listened for the click of the door. Only when I knew he was gone did I allow my composure to falter. I bent forward, resting my head in my hands. I didn't cry though, as I knew Samuel would be back the moment he heard a tear fall. I breathed heavily and curled into myself as much as the stitches on my side would allow.